Well, hello there, and welcome to the Homa Hangout on a Friday. Special edition this week. We've got some cool things lined up for you. Hope you're doing well, back from our short break. And yeah, I hope you had a relaxing little rest from game dev and some time with your family and all that good stuff. So before we begin today, just a reminder, come and join us over on that Discord if you want to get some feedback on your games, want to check out or ask any questions that you may have, along with viewing all the new games that have been releasing each and every week. There's streaming there for you. What is up, Tom? What is up, Colette? What is up, Chris? What is up, Jilly? What is up, everybody in the chat? Without further delay today. What is up, James? G'day, sir. And Chris is on holiday in Slovakia. Very cool indeed. That is like international, isn't it? All right, so without further delay, I am going to bring on George, our ideation expert here at Homa. What is up, George?
Hello, Kevin. Nice to see you again.
Indeed. Just before we begin today, and in case anybody missed our last few streams where you were presenting for us, can you just give us a quick rundown of who you are and what you do here at Homa?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, first and foremost, hello everybody in the stream. Looking at myself and Kevin. Myself, I'm George, as you said. I'm an ideation expert here at Homa. I work in the industry for about 5 years, the hypercasual industry and hybrid now. And what I do here at Homa is that I monitor the market. I do a lot of market analysis, market reports. I generate new ideas for the publishing managers to give to their studios. I work with the publishing managers to improve their ideation process, and I brainstorm a lot with the publishing managers and with ChatGPT. If you looked at my latest session with you, but basically what I do is all around ideation and game design, game creation, building up new concepts that hopefully can be published and disrupt the market in a way.
Perfect.
Hopefully,
Yeah, and I don't think too many people will know this, but once you run some tests with us and you get to a little bit further along and you get it to the next stage, this is where all these ideas and where George can help is that we can serve you these ideas that are fully backed by data and full on research, and that's just one of the perks you have when you come and test your games with us. You get the full force of our machine behind you to feed you ideas and all of that good stuff. So today, George, I'm really interested about this one. You're going to present to us today some of the trends that we need to know about moving in, certainly for the next couple of quarters, of what we're seeing now.
yeah,
But I don't want to say any more because you're far more qualified to say anything else than me here. So I'm going to pass over to you, and then we'll pop back afterwards for a little bit of Q&A. So for anyone who's got any
sure.
questions, stack the questions in the chat and I'll try and find them. And then we're going to have a look at some other games and all that good stuff. So I'm going to pass over to you now, George, and yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So today I'm here to present to you the art styles that I think are, and I saw myself becoming the trend right now in prototyping, in even in games that are already published. And I created for you and for the whole Homa Club team the art style matrix, as I call it, mostly focused on 3D graphics. I didn't include 2D graphics here because they sporadically appear. They are not a trend at this moment, for at least. And what I found out is that there are really three axes in terms of graphics. Beginning with the cartoonish graphics, which we all know what they are. They're pretty much the classic hyper-casual stick man, simple colors, brighty, something that looks like a cartoon, as the name says it. So it's on the far left of the spectrum here. Um, and then you have the full-blown realism on the other side of the spectrum, which has games that are really pushing the envelope in terms of unity polygons and in terms of textures that are really realistic. And then what I found out also is that there are a lot of levels that are being used since the past and that are being used now of fidelity in that term, in those types of realism. So you can go from low fidelity games that use pixel graphics or square graphics or low poly graphics, as you want to call it, to high fidelity graphics that really have a lot of polygons. They have super detailed textures, bump maps, normal maps. They use a lot more complexity in the processing of their graphics. And some examples I distribute here in this matrix. You can see that uh, on the far right of the realism spectrum and on the also the high fidelity spectrum, you can see where the trend kind of lies right now. So this is what I found out is that high fidelity realism graphics seems to be working really well. So you can see there are so many examples that use um, super realistic graphics and high fidelity graphics. For example, I'm going to go more in depth into each of these styles, but you can see here that most of them here are pretty much close to a game that you'll find out on Steam or on other platforms beside mobile. They're really pushing the envelope in terms of graphic quality. And then on the other side, you also have the mix of cartoonish and realism graphics. And here you see games like Ammo Fever from Homa, Merge Master, Doll DIY, and other games like Attack Hole that goes a little bit more outside of the mixing of graphics. This is also something that we noticed that is working particularly well. Um, this thing of mixing background graphics that are super detailed and the playable characters are actually cartoonish really gives a great contrast in games. So as you can see here, so for example, in Merge Master, I mean, you have a completely cartoonish arena here, but the models are actually pretty realistic. You have a realistic T-Rex, you have realistic raptors, and then you have cartoonish effects also on top of it. So it really highlights the game part of the game and the fun part of the game while keeping it realistic and engaging and a little bit immersive, so that you can have a bigger and broader audience that can really enjoy your games. Uh, then, when we're talking about fidelity levels, you really can find that games on low fidelity that are really been used since the beginning of hypercasual, even towards the realism side, like Face Sculptor from Crazy Labs, or this is called the Foot Spa, I believe, from Lion Studios or Ruby Games. I'm not completely sure, but they are all using low fidelity, low poly, and turning towards the realism part because you can see that there is some detail, but it's on the lower end. What this allows them to do is that having a simulation game that still looks real, still has some level of detail, but you can add a lot of juiciness by having a little bit of cartoonish. So you can see that it's leaning towards the left, more towards the right. And you can see that you can add special effects that highlight the juiciness of the effects, the 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 special controllers that you have to remove certain substances from the body here, for example. They're all a little bit cartoonish, but still keeping it real so that you can have that sense of realism in a simulation game. That's really important. But I'm really going to go more deep into this in the next slides. And then if I go again to the left side of the cartoonish and go upside into the high fidelity part, you have games like Desert DIY that have super high poly, big high poly count and are still keeping it super cartoonish. So that's what I mean by mixed cartoonish. It's really taking advantage of both sides of the spectrums in graphics and really innovating in terms of product visually. When we try to spot the genres that these visual styles adapt to, we can spot some of them really well. You can see that on the ultra realistic side and in the high fidelity part, we have water and destruction base. So So you use, for example, if I go back, I think we can see better, but you have games that use water in all of their games. So water, it's very, I'm not saying it's easy to produce in Unity, but there are already even Unity kits that have ultra realistic water, and that you can use much more easily than just building it from scratch. And also destruction games, I mean, high fidelity and destruction and realism go hand in hand in terms of visual effects, even more on creatives, as you'll see later. Then, if you go a little bit down on the fidelity scale, you have shooters that go also towards the realism part. You have games like Infantry Attack, Air Defense 3D, that really focus on on being on the center of the screen and immersing yourself in a war scenario, which is, I think, is highlighted by using realism rather than cartoonish, because you have just so many visual effects and so many stimulus coming at you, that using this kind of style really enhance the, I think, the performance of the game. Then, if you notice also that battle games tend to use mixed realism. I give here two examples. For example, we see here that Merge Master, as I mentioned before, has realistic assets but a cartoonish background and arena. And also, Ammo Fever, one of our recent titles, also shares the same thing, despite that it's not really the same kind of battle game, but it's battling against a wave of zombies, and it's also introducing a defense mechanism and an idle mechanism. It really shares the same kind of style, I'd say, and it really highlights the playable characters, and at the same time having a huge contrast to really help on the CPI side. And then you have smaller examples like the more arcadey games like Attack Hole, that really use realistic assets but with the cartoonish textures, which is also very interesting. So you can see that you have bombs, grenades, that if you look at the base model, they're really well modeled, but then they use colorful and a little bit cartoonish textures, so that you keep it a little bit more, you gamify it a little bit more in terms of visual style. And then finally, theme based. I put here, for example, voxel styles and low poly. We noticed that lately we've seen this low fidelity style that goes towards the realism in terms of physics. For example, like um, like these two examples here that I'll show even more in detail later. Uh, they work very well in terms of physics and destruction of polygons and creating a little bit of chaos visually, but still keeping the visual style a little bit low fidelity, so that I think even the mobile device can handle that kind of polygons going on the screen. Um, Now going more in depth on each style, cartoon. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because you all know what it is. It's the main style that has been used since ever on hypercasual, so unrealistic style that has a lot of live colors, contrast. Also resembles a cartoon, a drawing, and it's the further away I think you can get from realism, except if you start mixing, which is what we're gonna talk after. And before I jump into the mixing, I want to talk a little bit about the low fidelity realism. As I said before, uh, this is some examples that I've chosen here. You can see, I think this one might be the oldest example. You can see that they started um, icing on the cake with a little bit of low polygons here. You can see even that the circle is not perfect, but that might even be on purpose, so that the feeling of pouring the icing is a bit more juicy when highlighted by the graphics and the colors. And I think the technology wasn't advanced, I mean, to mobile back then. And then when you go back, you can see that you can have a little bit more detail, but you really keep it low fidelity. There's no perfect circles. The colors are a bit rough, and then you can, by having this low poly count, you can add a lot of visual styles and visual effects They're really going to highlight the simulation games that, in the end, what you're looking for in the simulation games are really that juicy action that you have for a few seconds and passing on to the next level. But I think this was it's the reason why they still use this style to this day on this kind of genre. Usually it's used on simulation, hypercasual simulations, and I think nowadays it's going towards the more realistic style. People are experimenting more and more in terms of detail and fidelity, but I think we also are going to see more of that later. Uh, Next one, the one that I've talked before also, cartoon versus realism, is really borrowing elements from both sides, as I said, keeping it contrasty, um, keeping it engaging for audiences when they see the video on Facebook, so that it really highlights that you have, for example, on Ammo Fever, a realistic sand, realistic bullets, but still you're keeping it cartoonish in terms of stickmans, in terms of playable characters, so that you keep this contrast that it really helps on CPI. Same goes with Attack Hole. Attack Hole, you see here, you see that the grenades are pretty well detailed, the bullets, the shotgun shells, but the textures you can clearly see, and with the ground and with the visual effects, that is still using cartoonish textures. The same goes, I mean, for the other games. I mean, it goes without saying. Super high poly count here, for example, and extremely cartoonish graphics. Here you can actually see a mix of 2D and 3D graphics. So in dull DIY, so the hand pretty realistic in terms of textures and poly count, and completely 2D in terms of the action, which is super interesting. And merge match, as I told before, yeah, realistic assets and the world and background and arena is cartoonish. Now, when I talked before about the shooters, this is really what I meant by zooming in here a little bit. You can see that it's really the genre is mostly used in this kind of realism. So you see, you have zombie shooting, you have airplane shooting, you have machine gun shooting. It's really the only difference that this has from the even more realistic assets is that it's has at least one element that is not fully optimized in terms of textures and realism. For example, you have detail, depth, shadow, textures that, for example, let's take the example here of um, infantry attack. You have super detailed weapon. The sand is pretty good. The smoke you can see also pretty realistic. The rocks, the grass, but then you look at the players a little bit, the soldiers and the tanks and the video effects on top. And if you play through the game even more, you see that once you get into the helicopter, it gets even more cartoonish when you look down. But that's, I think, the one aspect that it really uh, takes them apart from the ultra realism. Same goes for example, this zombie game here, the second one. It has realistic weapons, hands models. It has the zombie. It has the mountains also. They're a bit realistic. But then when you look at the ground, you can see that it wasn't really worked that much, and that's also why it's in this category, not on the ultra realistic. Same for the left, same for the plane game. And you can see that also the military genre is the most predominant style here. So all of them use shooting, use high caliber weapons. You can even use machines and operating airplanes and tanks. And as you progress to the spectrum, you see that this changes a little bit. Once you jump to the ultra realism, that is more water based and destruction based, as I mentioned. So, for example, you can see here that they focus in all aspects of the graphics. It also almost resembles photorealism, but it's a bit stepped down from that. It really the detail of the textures you can see here on the fish. It even has the bumps. The lighting is perfect. The scale of the world and the scale of the objects are really compared to reality. The color, shadows, and reflections are super worked on and very well done. and the saturation that each one of them has, it's perfect. I'd say almost it's ultra realistic, as I can say. The ultra realistic for a mobile game, of course, because when you go outside of mobile, you have even more of that. And a common trait of all of this, as I said, it's using water on most of these, as you can see. Fishing, even in military themes, you're using water, even though you're not using it, or if you're in the middle of it, it's still there. It still gives that element of reality that that water brings to games. And I think it's a very interesting thing that once you think about it, that ultra realism it's coming to mobile. It's coming out. It's already here in mobile, and we wonder what's the next step. Do we get like fully realistic in terms of graphics, photorealistic, or do we have something like this, maybe? Which are some examples I'm going to bring from Unreal 5. This, for example, is a video of of a town in France. You can here for as you can see now is a video, but at one point it's going to turn into the game, and it's very impressive how it really looks like the video. So here now it changed into the game. You can see like it's almost indistinguishable. This is in-engine action, which is pretty interesting. And then you really have a game that's already built in a realistic style like this on the right, which is mimicking a GoPro camera, but it's impressive how can color and lightning can affect the way the game looks. So my question is really, is this coming to mobile, even if it's just on creatives? Is this something that's going to really help the CPI? I'd say probably yes, because people like this kind of videos. When you show them on Facebook, they have this instant surprise look to even think that an app looks like this on mobile. So my take is probably that this is going to be even more used on mobile than ever. We're just a step away from using it, and it's really indistinguishable almost from real life. It's really crazy. Uh, one trivia part that I wanted to display here is that, remember in, let's say, 2007, personally for me, was when I felt the most generational leap in terms of graphics, when we had Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, and Crisis going out in the same year. And you can clearly see that once Crisis came out and they had these kind of graphics, all of the other games that came out on the other years started to mimic this kind of look, and it really put it on the map the way it looked. And I think I speak for myself, and I think most people, that we became a little bit spoiled on how we want our games to look. Uh, and I think it's just a matter of time, really, that on hypercasual and hybrid, people want to see more and more on this, and that's why I think the realistic and high fidelity style, it's working, and the ultra realistic as well. And it's just a matter of time that we get this kind of generational leap also in hyper and hybrid. Now I want to show you how a studio or a publisher would display their gameplays when they're using a realistic style versus what they use in the creative. For example, here you have Crazy Plane Landing from Boomhits. And I'd say that the gameplay is high fidelity, definitely going on the far right of the spectrum in terms of realism. You have uh, you have very well detailed models, but there's some textures here that are a bit rough. For example, the water, the valley there. You can clearly see that it's just a baked texture. It's not really being reflected any light, any global light, I'd say. And once you look to the creatives, you can see that it's going towards another direction, almost ultra realistic. You have the global lighting that is perfect. You have the explosions that are way different. You have smoke. You have light going through the smoke. You have these all kind of crazy details that really helps on the creative, really, because that's, I think, one person is gonna look at the two of those and really is gonna prefer the one on the right. I'm really sure of it. Another example from the same publisher, ship ramp jumping, also using high fidelity, as you can see here on the left example. The buildings on the background there are pretty rough compared to the right, where you have all of the details of the windows, of the rafters, and everything. The explosion at the bottom here on the creative it's pretty non-comparable to this effect here on the left, which I think doesn't even have an explosion. It's just pure destruction. But the main key is that auto realism on the creatives and high fidelity realism on the gameplay. Focusing a lot on the creatives is the smoke and the explosions and the realistic global lighting. I think also the scale of the city goes without saying that on the creative you have so many more buildings because you don't have to run it in real time on the game, but it really gives a sense of scale. Infantry attack, I think, is an example that's a bit more smooth, and it's in terms of comparisons between gameplay and creative. I'd say that in infantry attack, both they are high fidelity realism. They just that they have a more better foliage on the creatives rather than on the gameplay, and the video effects are more highlighted. So you can see here on the weapon itself, the fire of the muzzle is a bit more highlighted here. The foliage everywhere, and they removed also the UI, which gives you a bit more immersion, despite that you have a little bits of UI here just to highlight the enemy's health. But even if you look at the greater picture, there's really no UI once you look at it, unless you're really looking at the red bar here. Compared to this, I mean, you have the health here. It's a pretty interesting learning from these games here, which also air defense shares. As you can see, both they look identical, but the textures are a little bit better on the creative. Once you look side by side, you see that's a little more worked here. There's a bit more details in terms of bump and normal maps, and I think also that the UI is completely gone. Yeah, if I'm not missing something, yeah, there's not even health bars for enemies. There's nothing. It's really just a pure video of action and shooting down planes. Um, and I think I come to my last example, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Evan. Uh, I'm happy now to throw it back to you.
Wow. Well, first off, George, thank you so much for that. It's a fascinating topic, and I think there's a tons to take away from that. What, for me personally, we're definitely seeing the trend for the more realistic stuff coming in, and I think it's really interesting of how we strike the balance between mixing the more realistic graphics and stuff with the cartoony things, which is somewhere between sort of the high fidelity and more cartoony. Do you think that is where people should start experimenting? I'm just trying to think of like the actionable type things, because there's a couple of comments in the chat with obviously there's definitely some challenges when it comes to optimization. We're having, more low poly models and changing the way you apply your maps and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
where what do you think would be the best place to start? And I know it's an impossible question, but do you think, all right, let me phrase that slightly different. Is is there a particular genre? Obviously, we saw the shooting and the military type thing working the best, but can this be experimented in any kind of genre, do you think?
I've seen on the genres that I've pointed out, the ones that
Yeah.
I would recommend to try on will be the battle game, like Merge Master, I'd say, like a versus game. Um, defense games or survival games. Also, you can add mixed realism or even full realism. I think it would work well. Shooters, definitely. I would recommend any military style. I think that it really benefits from that kind of style visually. I think puzzles, I haven't seen anything that worked so far in that type of style. Um, I think even arcade idols can also be used in this regard. You just need to have a really engaging core loop. If you just then paste the realistic style to this arcade idol, I don't see why not it wouldn't work. Despite that, mostly it's cartoonish, but I think that it's a genre also you could try on. And simulation, I wouldn't go. Also, there's one I wouldn't say that you should try on because I just haven't seen enough examples in like ultra realistic simulation that work. But I will keep it low poly on that. Not low poly, low fidelity on that,
Mhm.
but definitely shooter, military, and battle games versus games. For example, let's say duels, fighting games where you have one person versus the other. Let's say it's a cowboy shootout, it's a boxing match. Those sort of battles, I'd say also.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I think it's really, as a game developer, I think it's super exciting to see this more realistic. This is the sort of games that everybody wants to make, I would say.
Yeah,
Even though I super like the cartoony and the say games type vibe and style of all of that. But I think it's really nice that these more realistic type things are making an impact now. And it may be that we're just seeing a little bit of fatigue with the same old looking games all the time. That we're yearning for a little bit more, and especially with the power of the devices now. I mean, we
yeah,
really saw a big shift in mobile with Infinity Blade. I'm not sure if you remember that one. That was one of the
I do
big
remember.
Apple ones that really made that leap from like the really crap graphics. I'm just going to say it to more of a console feely type thing, and that was probably,
Yeah,
oh my goodness, that must be 8-10 years ago now or something. I'm not sure.
yeah, for sure.
Um,
And even
yeah,
and this style of graphics, I'm not saying something new that on mobile. You have, of course, we have Call of Duty on the
sure.
top charts with super polished graphics. You have PUBG, also really good graphics. We have all sort of games that are more towards the core type and mid core that all already had these graphics. But yeah, these examples are more towards hybrid and hyper.
Yeah, got it. So there's a couple of questions I want to address before I forget. And I know NL asked, he's looking for the name of a game. So if you could just flick over to your slide about the
Yeah,
shooter games, I believe it's the first game, the blue one. Um, I'm just going to flick over there. I'm going to go quiet, but it's the first blue game, if you can see on your slides there.
yeah. Might have to get out of the presentation mode
Oh yeah, I
just to
just totally
click on
pressed.
the.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll let you do it. I completely pressed the wrong button there, which is great.
No
There we
worries.
go. It's nice being live, isn't it? So yeah, if you know the name of that game, if
Yeah.
not, Anil, I
Zombie
will.
Zombie Rise X.
Zombie Rise X. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully that answered that question. Of course, if you've got any other questions, guys and gals, please do let us know. We're here. We're here all day. Well, not really. We're here for a little while longer. But if you've got any questions about this stuff, I think it's a super interesting topic. We actually played the very last example that you gave there with the Voodoo game, the infantry attack. We
Oh
actually
yeah.
played that live on the stream, and it was really one of the first ones that we saw quite some time ago now, where they started bringing that in. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's almost like hyper casualizing the sort of the console type games, which is really
Yeah.
it's like I think it's more fresh, and that's why I think it's an interesting topic. And I love the fact that you can try and mix and max, and I see there's going to be some challenges there, but the examples you gave did it really well. I just want to get this question in, which was just somewhere that I can't see. Tom's asking something here. Don't you see a high number of uninstalls when they see those really detailed, almost video like ultra realism adverts, and then they get the game and it's a little bit more naff, shall we say? So,
Mm,
do we see that like the CPI could be really low and you get loads of installs, but once they actually get into the game, you see a huge drop off of users.
I'd say if the game is completely different, I'd say the conversion rate is probably going to be bad. Definitely, I've seen that happen. Uh, as I'm not a publishing manager, I'm not looking at that all single time, so I don't have that kind of data with me. Yeah, I mean the publishing manager probably on Discord could answer that question better than me. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if the game is completely different, you have a crisis-like game, an FPS that's super realistic with super beautiful water. Then you get into the Play Store and you get a stickman on the beach with a weapon. Is not really gonna work. I'm sure of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there needs to be some close association. Otherwise, you just feel let down and scammed, basically. But I think the boom bit one that you did with the plane, and we clearly saw that the water was kind of like there was low poly shoreline there, and obviously there
Hmm.
was no reflections like you mentioned. I think people will forgive that, and that's where, if you get your core loop right and you get a real nice game feel about your game, people can forgive it. And that is really, when we see the ultra realism, that is marketing, flat out marketing, which is what
Yeah.
which is what entices people in. But you never want to feel like uber let down or completely
Yeah.
different. I think people, no doubt there will be some people that you'll suffer, but I'm sure, like George said, we can find out a little bit more info on that. But honestly, I think if there's lower, uh, what am I trying to say? I don't think it will be as. I think people will be more forgiving than you think if your gameplay is fun. Um, all
Yeah.
right.
Absolutely.
Um, can you explain high fidelity more? Says Elbow.
Yeah. Absolutely. Shall we go back to the
Why don't you
presentation? Just have
fire
a
up? I mean, we can either go on to load up one of these games that we've got, or you can fire up a
sure.
slideshow. It's up to you, whichever you think would work best. I'm good with both now.
We can start on the slideshow and then go to the games, I'd say.
Sure, we'll do that. So,
So
guys, we've got
what
some games lined up here from the examples that George said while he's loading up his slideshow there. But yeah, we're
so
going to go in and have a look at some hands-on. I've downloaded a ton. Um, so just trying to,
and
if you can,
I'm sharing now the slideshow, yeah.
here
Can you
we
see it now?
go. Perfect. And let's just try this. Okay, and let's go.
Okay, perfect. So what I meant by high fidelity is that you have at least one of the parts of the graphics that is not as worked as the others. That's what it's stepping in the way between high fidelity and ultra realism. So what I mean by that is that the example that I gave here on infantry attack, for example, is that they have excellent models. They have excellent textures for the sand, for the rocks, for the smoke. The video effects are also great. But then once you go to the actual models of the soldiers, the tanks, they are a tiny bit low on the fidelity scale. If I go back to the matrix here, you can see that the soldiers here from infantry attack are almost here on this example here, and this one is the same example. The zombies are a bit here at the middle fidelity, I'd say. So that's, I think, what differs from ultra realism and high fidelity. Um, if I go back again to my high fidelity slide, um, what I meant by that, the elements that I think that are more work than the others, it could be the detail of the textures, the the depth and the scale of the environment and the world, the shadows, how well are they worked, the nuance of colors and saturations, and one of those elements is probably not going to be as worked as the others. So that's what separates, I say, from ultra realism and high fidelity.
Cool. So yeah, it's kind of like one below ultra realism, right? I think it's a good
Yeah,
way of trying to remember it. So like, it's not trying to convince anyone it's real life. it's definitely a graphical representation that's trying to get close to realism but isn't pretending to be. Um, so fidelity has to do with detailing, while realism, cartoonism is about art style. I think that's a good way of doing it, Elbow. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, fidelity has more to do with the model representation. So how well is your models and your textures and shadows are built into the game compared to a low poly one. Let's say high fidelity is a super well polished and high poly game. A low poly game will be a low fidelity game. Like it's not completely rounded. The circles, it has some parts that are blocky. It might be completely pixelized. I would say that is low fidelity, and high fidelity is the full realistic style that you see, and you can look at it and say, okay, this resembles an accurate representation of a weapon. Let's say that's, I think, the difference between
Yeah, I
the
think
spectrum
one
of the
of the
fidelity.
examples, and it's only, and you mentioned it on your presentation, George, and I remember when we played it on the stream that and I'm going to say the Voodoo one again with the infantry game, the gun
Yeah,
that you fire in that game is super realistic and it's trying to be really realistic. And yet when the parachuters come in, they're clearly like models and they're not, that you don't buy that they're like parachute people
yeah,
coming in. They're blatantly like blocky models, which is kind of weird,
yeah,
but it's still all right. And I think
yeah,
that's a good one.
for sure.
Um,
Yeah,
all
agree.
right, Simon. Simon, what is up, Simon? Good to see you here. He's made a great point. He remembers Infinity Blade 2. Wow, showing our age here, Simon. But he's saying like what the bottleneck for hitting that high fidelity is obviously the different Android devices that will struggle with the power and how we make our games to work on. iOS is slightly different. You can support 6, 7 upwards or whatever we are now, but for Android, is it, what do we do for the Android devices that when we're trying to make our game available to as many devices as possible? What do you think? I mean, maybe that's where the mix of high fidelity and like that's where the mixes come in, where you can,
Yeah,
sacrifice some of the
for sure.
quality.
And I think also it's where the realism in creatives comes from. So you can display it how you would like it to display it on your mobile game, on your Android phone. You can display it fully realistic, fully modeled as with high polygons. But in reality, what you can deliver to them is it's that product that is as close as you can get, without sacrificing FPS and any kind of performance in the game. But yeah, I think also that's where mixed realism enters. Also, yeah, as you said, I think it's a great solution to that, to Android
Yeah,
users.
so
Let's say.
maybe that's where you start. Listen, let's fire up the iPad and let's have a look at some of these examples. Of course, keep the questions coming, folks. If you want to ask anything throughout the session, as always on a Friday, and if you want to carry on the conversation, be sure to hit us over on the Discord there, and we can talk more. So, George, I'm going to leave this to you. You can choose any example that you want, and we'll just fire it up, and you can
Um,
talk through it for us.
let's go with the precision, no, pressure wash.
Okay, so I'm on airplane mode here. Hopefully, this game will load. Published by
This
Wallach. So I haven't downloaded any of these before. So let's hopefully these will work for us.
Yeah, so this is a more modern example of mix of realism. So once you start, you get a pretty cartoonish feel of the game. So the hose has a little bit of a realism in its physics, but now at this exact moment, when you pass on to the action level, you can see that it becomes not photorealistic, but it becomes high fidelity. It has good detail, but I think the water jet, it's really not there in terms of realism compared to the other aspects of the level. And then you go back to the cartoonish feel again here. So this is a great example of mixing realism and cartoonish in one game.
Yeah, this is cool. I've
So
never
yeah,
played this game before, but this, you're right. This is a really good example of mixing the two. And this here that we're looking at, the tarmac and the spray pack and the spray that we're kind of getting rid of that orange line there, is
yeah,
really quite quite realistic, and these ones, when we go back to the actual gameplay,
Yeah.
the water jet. Actually, I think the water jet looks pretty rubbish, even for there's the example. I know the example here is to really highlight it, but I think you could probably do better than that. But we've
Yeah.
clearly got a typical hyper casual sort of auto walker type platform here. But yeah, I think this is a great example, George. It exactly shows you um,
Yeah.
the
So
mix
yeah,
here.
before I forgot, yeah, runner is a genre that you can apply, as you can see here. I forgot to mention before, but yeah, clearly you can do it. And yeah, you're saying the jet, yeah, it's a bit rough compared to the rest of the textures. So like the rust is good. The stones are also
Stone is
have
super high
realistic
fidelity,
texture. Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
But but then you go fully cartoonish when you go here, except for the hose that it gets a little bit realistic in terms of graphics. But even there, it's a bit exaggerated. It moves a lot.
Yeah, it
So yeah,
does, doesn't it? This is a weird game. I've never played this game before. Um,
well, it's on the top chart, I think. Still,
is it?
yeah.
Right. Wow. Okay. I wonder why. I wonder why. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I said, it doesn't matter what I think. It's just seems
Yeah,
like
I
a
think I think elbow 005 has a point. Maybe it's intentional because water really requires graphical power to be displayed in game. So I think it's on purpose that it's not as realistic as it can be.
got it. All right.
Yeah,
So yeah. Okay.
yeah. We
All
can
right,
move to
so let's go
maybe
to a different one, shall we? Because that wasn't much
U-boat,
fun. That wasn't much.
maybe.
U-boat. Okay, an old one from
Yeah,
Voodoo. This is really old. This game, probably one of the very first ones from a bigger publisher that really experimented with the realistic stuff.
yeah. I'd say this is the first fully realistic simulation military, if you want to put it all in the same basket, game that really was published. Um, it's triggering my OCD. Okay,
All
I
right,
guess
so
that's
this
the
is
point.
this is kind of a weird one. So this is looking pretty realistic. What's super
Yeah,
weird that this is a landscape game. So it's
it is a
amazing because
landscape game. Yeah,
on my iPad I'm looking at it upside down and back to front here. So I think we won't last too long on this one, but I'm surprised it's working if I'm honest. I don't know what we're gonna look at here, but this is really realistic type intro there. I won't,
so yeah, as you can see, look at the water, how realistic it is. The model of the boat, the smoke is pretty good. The skyline is, it looks static actually, but that's why I think I consider this a high fidelity. I think the skyline is pretty static and the explosion is not super worked on, like the water, for example. But it's a great example of the first example that I can say that I've seen a high fidelity game published. This might be the one.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah, look.
remember this from ages ago. This is really weird
Yeah.
because I'm doing, I am doing this so back to front. Ooh.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
so we
it's
saw the explosion there wasn't particularly cinematic
yeah.
in terms of graphics, but yeah, it's kind of it's that blend, isn't it? And I guess sometimes some of these decisions as a developer might be taken out. Like you play it and you realise that your FPS is dropping and it's chugging
Yeah.
at your processor. So maybe you have to make some compromises and pull back on some stuff. So maybe
I
that's the
assume it's on
way a lot of
purpose,
the
yeah.
decisions are made. Yeah. Can't
For
wait for
sure,
it
yeah.
to surprise me with low fidelity effects now. Okay. All right. So I
Okay.
think this is a really good. Can you shoot into the water, or is it just a video
I
texture?
think
That's a
you
great point.
can.
Let's
I think
try
you
it
can
out,
if I'm not
Tom.
mistaken.
This is really difficult. I've got to bend my head here because this is really weird. So I'm just going to start another one. We'll try and shoot in the water because I'm, like I said, I've got this round the wrong way. Ooh, pretty sunset. So let's see if I can shoot in the water. Oh, that's funny, isn't it? So I can't go lower.
Oh,
So I can't go down. That should. I think you can see it on your screen.
it
That
just
is
goes,
pointing
yeah.
down. So yeah, they've totally faked that, Tom. It's probably a video, which is a really cool trick, I think, because that water looks super real, doesn't it? Oh, I kind of want to play this
It,
now. Right, let's stop. All right, so that's a really good example of a super realistic
um,
one.
We can jump very quickly to a simulation game that I feel is going towards the most realistic part of the spectrum, which is the beauty care game from Ruby, I think.
Okay, so this is the dentist one, isn't it?
It's all sorts of care, I think.
Is it? I don't know. I don't know many of these games. I'll be honest, George. I haven't seen this one. I was hoping you were going to say the Say Games one because I really want to play that. It's been on my list to play for a hot minute. All right, so I'm
I
just
will
going to
do it
go
after.
through this and I'll let you talk through it. I'll shut up and you can. I'm just going to press the buttons. Ew.
So as you can see, when I saw the ASO on the Play Store, it looked very much more a realistic game. But as you can see, they're still using the cartoonish, but the model it's much more well polished in terms of polygons. So you can see again the furs have a good feel when you pass the razor on it. So you get really more realistic effects. I think if you go further on the levels, you get even more realistic textures.
Okay.
One is, let's see if we can get there, just to give an example. Yeah, with the mushrooms, I'd say, yeah, you can see there. So they're a bit more worked than the foot itself. So the mushrooms have a little bit more realistic texture. So it's also a good mix that studios are now trying to implement in simulations game, which we haven't seen before that much.
Okay. I mean, I've got to be honest, this is pretty grim. Um, Just a quick tip for everyone out there: if you have mushrooms on your feet, you should definitely be seeking medical advice, I would say. But yeah, it's kind of like that. It's almost like the next level models, isn't it? It's that taking it
Yeah.
one stage further and getting really realistic.
I
Okay,
see
so
there
you can
also
see
the
there.
model. The
Yeah,
model gets a bit
exactly.
more realistic also, yeah.
That's it. That's a really good example of like I would say it's kind of in my brain it's kind of almost Pixar-y. You're kind of getting to that really
Yeah.
more in 3D softy type models that really look like they're high quality. Let's do one more. I've got a very
Oh
awkward foot
God.
there. All right, we got to
What
do it.
happened there?
Oh my goodness. All right. I hope this doesn't crack. Are we just strapping it up?
I think that the physics of the band actually are pretty well done also in terms of realism.
Yeah, it looks
So
pretty.
you have a lot of details that it's pointing toward that direction,
Yeah, and
if
now
you
we're
compare to older
back
games.
to the mushrooms again, which I'm just going to turn off at this point because that is no one wants
It's
to
okay.
see
This
that. Not on a Friday, do we? All right, so
we,
next one.
we can play the same games now if you want to.
All right, I really love this one because this leans into a lot of the controls, which I think are going to make quite a comeback or have room to make a comeback this year. We saw this with Tasty Pill, did 3 or 4 titles with these almost like remote control car sort of controls or radio controlled car, radio controlled car controls, which I find really interesting. But I don't know this game, so where does this one sit on the realism? Um,
Uh, this is also, I'd say, a mix. Because oh, it's quite noisy actually.
yeah,
Is it
sorry, I'm
possible to
trying to.
turn off the music?
Yeah, I'm just trying to turn it down. There we go.
I'd say this is on the medium fidelity. And what I think I'd say is that what I think I meant by that is that the cockpit there of the truck, it's adding a level of realism to the game, not visually, because it's still a bit cartoonish in terms of textures and models, but in terms of experience, for sure it's giving the an extra layer of realism. So you can feel that the controller and putting on the gears gives you a feel of actually driving the truck compare if you just did it with a joystick. I think this is a good example of mixed realism and in-game realism in terms of experience, not just visually.
Okay, I've got to be honest with you, George. I'm struggling with trying.
The phys- the
I'm
physics are
trying to
great
work
also.
out what you're saying here, and I think I might not be alone. So go through that for me one more time.
Sorry, I
So
couldn't hear.
in terms of this one, where does this one sit? I just want to make sure I fully
I
understand.
Yeah, I'd say it sits on the middle fidelity, towards the high fidelity. So between mid and high fidelity in terms of models. So it has good models, but the textures are going towards the cartoonish side. And the cockpit there, the driving wheel and the gears and everything, it's giving for me a layer of realism that is not visual, but it's the experience itself.
Yeah,
So
got it.
this would sit on the middle of the chart, of the matrix, right in the middle, right next to Ammo Fever, I'd say, a little bit to the right to the realism, and but staying still in the middle.
Yeah, got it. And you can see how detailed these models are, right? There's
Yeah,
lots of details within this fire truck here. We can
and
see all the run.
the physics
Yeah,
are
got
really
it.
well done. But yeah, the effects are completely cartoonish,
Ooh,
and the textures, So
this is
that's why it
cool.
stays in the middle, I'd say.
Got it. So I was having fun putting the fire out there. That was all right, we better stop this one because I want to. Oh yeah, look at this.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think this is the example I was looking for because I was struggling on the first one because
yeah,
it was a really basic level, but this really does. Um, I totally get it now. This is quite a nice game actually. Do I have to swing this thing around?
yeah. You do have, yeah,
Wow. Okay. Uh oh. I'm gonna be rubbish at this. All right. Skills. All right.
yeah.
Nice. All right. Oops.
I think for a last example, I think most of these games were mixed realism, really, and I think we can say that Attack Hole is also, I think, the biggest example of that because it was number one for a long time. It's one of the biggest games of the year already,
Yeah, it is.
and if you look at Attack Hole, as I was saying before when I was on the Matrix slides, look at the models of that game in terms of the bombs and the shotgun shells and everything. They are pretty realistic. When you go more, I think, towards the bombs, like the nukes and everything, they are pretty realistic. Even the models itself, I'm saying, not the textures,
Yeah,
but
I
the
think
the
that's
models
the
are.
distinction. Oops.
Yeah, that's where the mix gets in the way.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think
and,
this is
and,
a good
and
example. Yeah.
and it turned out to be a great combo that really worked for Homa.
Yeah, exactly. So, as George was quite rightly saying, and obviously it's one of our games, so we are slightly biased. But if you didn't know, this was the most downloaded game in the first quarter of this year. 44 million downloads in the first 3 months of this year. And this has got that classic mix of a simple cartoon style, almost character and gameplay area, but with hyper realistic models, not so much textures, but models for the gameplay itself. And one of the best comes back to what we were saying with the plane game, where that was hyper realistic in the CPI videos, but the game itself was lower res or lower fidelity, right? I'm just trying to get rid of this damn advert. Um, so Elbow says, so making a simulation style games with more hybrid gameplay is a good idea right now. Let me read that again. Making a simulation style game with a more hybrid gameplay is a good idea right now. What do you think, George?
Well, since the market is really going towards hybrid, anyways,
Yeah,
any feature that's going to add engagement to your game, it's definitely a good idea. I mean, being metagame or being inserted directly on the core loop, I think hybridizing your game right now is a smart choice.
yeah, I agree.
Depending on your goal, of course. If you want to stick with this hyper casual simulation, which still works nowadays, uh, it's still viable to stay completely hyper casual in those type of games. But hybrid, of course, it's one of the focus of Homa also.
Of course.
So
So yeah, we're we're
I'd say
we're
it was a smart choice.
yeah, we're leaning all into hybrid right now. But this game is super. This game is so addictive. It's so weird to me. It's one of those ones that I don't even know why I'm playing it. Oh, look at this on cue.
Oh, here you go.
So, what game is this, George? Is this infantry attack? Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not
Could
completely
be.
sure.
Look how many
I think so.
parachutes there are. That's
It is, yeah.
amazing.
But look at the soldiers.
Yeah,
Like in terms of realism, yeah, that's where you see really.
yeah. That's a right
Yeah,
on cue. That's perfect because you know it's not real, and but it kind of feels real. But when you then start looking at it, look at this. Here we go. So look at
yeah,
the
that's the
gun
playable. Yeah,
details to that helicopter. I mean, we won't talk about the grass or the rock textures. You could almost get away with the trees, but that helicopter is obscenely low poly, right?
yeah.
In comparison to the gun there. So I think that's a classic example of the mix there. Elbow says, I mean, giving simulation visual style is a good idea, right?
A simulation visual style.
You're gonna have to
Well,
rephrase that. I'm not quite sure what you mean.
I think it's strange to say that the visual style of a simulation game from the ones we know, if it's a good idea to still betting on that, I'd say. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, if you're pointing to that direction, if you're doing a simulation game, I think the style that you should try it's the low poly, the low fidelity, but going towards the realism as some of the studios now are doing. So bumping up those poly levels and adding some experiments in terms of textures. I'd say that's the best advice I can give for simulation games nowadays.
Yeah, and I think that's worth experimenting. I mean, you could have if you're going for a simulation game. I mean, imagine you're doing the dentist one, for instance, where you have like the simulation style cutesy sort of character, but really like high res, high fidelity tools that you use. I think it's worth experimenting with all this. I think that's the upshot. And with hyper casual and now with hybrid casual, it's all about testing. So I think setting yourself apart and testing some stuff out is a. I would just go for it and try some stuff and see what could work. I just want to shout out all the regular Homa Academy Hangout people because you can see at the back here we have the sort of forest and the background here on this boss part of Attack Hull. And Augustine, the publishing manager, in charge with Redline Games, said to me that because of a stream where we played this one, the city background and this forest background have been added in. So big props to everyone for giving that feedback. It was taken by the devs and the PM, and they've added it in, which is super cool.
Awesome.
All right, so that's Attack Hull. I mean, I think if has anyone got any more questions before we start to wrap up today? We've done about an hour here. Like I said, as always, if you want to see more like this and more from George, hit the like button to cast your vote. That lets us know that you like this game. I'm going to fire one last one up. Going balls, maybe supersonic. Um, I don't
I'll leave it
know.
to you.
I don't know. I mean, I know I haven't. I don't know this game, so let's put this one on from Crazy Labs. So yeah, do let us know in the chat or leave a comment if you're on the replay. Let us know what you thought about today's and do you want to see more
Yeah.
of this kind of stuff. Um, okay, so this is super cartoon. Why is this on the list here, George?
Look at the hand though.
Uh huh. There we go.
This this is an extreme mix of 2D graphics and 3D graphics, I'd say, because here you're building a paper doll, so that's why I think that's the visual style. But the hand is pretty detailed. I think even the nail polish has some shine to it. I don't know from the stream. I can't really see it, but it looks like it.
Yeah, and
But yeah,
Eagle Eyes from last week on the CPI show with Oleg, he was saying that the lady's hands working really well on CPI videos, and then we got it straight in the game. But yeah, look at the difference. This is a great one to end on today, I think, because
yeah,
that is like the lowest sort of honestly, Crazy Labs, that's the lowest quality 2D art. There's nothing fancy about that. And not that that's a bad thing, but it's a really basic 2D art, and there we have the 3D model with a high fidelity hand pointing to let you choose. So I think that's a really cool one to end on today. Um, I'm gonna just tap one to choose. I don't know really. Okay, swipe down to pull. Oh, I have no idea what I'm doing here.
so yeah, you're just cutting out the dolls.
Wow.
But
This is
even the animations are pretty good in terms of the hand also pulling everything. But then
yeah,
you get a completely 2D look, and then even customization it's fully 2D. I think that's really the point of the game. But yeah, the
yeah.
hand there really gives a nice contrasty look.
It does. I mean, this is clearly not aimed at me. I'll just have to pull that out. But yeah,
Clear,
look how
clearly.
they've built this thing. They built this amazingly well, haven't they? So I'm gonna put. Let's see if I can. I don't know what I can put. Hold on. What can I dress her up in now? Let's put some shoes on and check out the hand here, where she picks it up. Great camera work, and it's the ultimate mix of a high fidelity and like the lowest. I'm gonna say it in a nice
Yeah.
way. The lowest quality 2D graphics. Um, that you can get. All right, George,
Yeah.
we're going to wrap it up. Thank you to everybody for joining with us today. And most of all, thank you, George, for your presentation and
Thank you
going
for
through all
hosting
of
me.
that. Really interesting stuff. I really encourage everyone to try and do some experiments and mix it up a bit and get a fresh new look. I mean, amazing to see some of these games where if you go all out one, like, super console-y, or try and mix it up because it looks interesting and different. And I think that's always a really key factor when we're trying to stand out, if nothing else. We've got the presentation that will be with you on the replay inside the Academy. So you can get the matrix there and you can have a look at that at your own leisure. George, where can people reach out to you if they've got any more questions? Can they find you over
Uh,
on LinkedIn?
yeah, sure. My LinkedIn, I think, is linkedin.com/jpmmmedia,
Okay,
if I'm
well
not
we'll
mistaken.
put that underneath the stream in the replay on Monday
Sure.
for all the academy. And
It
yeah,
is
like I
indeed.
said,
I was correct. Yeah.
yeah,
That's the right
perfect, nice. All right, so
awesome.
without further ado, that's going to go and wrap it up for us today. Thanks everybody in the chat. Great to see you here, James, Elbow, everybody else to join with us today. Super appreciate it.
Thank
We
you so
are
much.
back next week, I believe. I will be posting up in the Discord, so come and join us over there. And yeah, with all that said and done, have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you for joining with us. And there we go. George, we will say goodbye and we'll say goodbye to
Goodbye.
everybody
Have
else.
a nice weekend, everybody, and
Yeah,
yourself, Kevin.
yeah,
Thanks for
likewise.
having
See you
me.
later, guys. Bye bye.